Previously on Legends of Aelos. Across the portcullis gate from the hand side, Briar, Dom, and everyone with them watch in horror as the infected slowly start to settle, considering all that remains of the uninfected civilians are their lifeless bodies, save for the mother and child that Briar had managed to rescue. As she sees to reuniting the two, and the others attempt to process what had just transpired before them, a tall man, unfamiliar to Briar and Dominicus, presents himself at the gate, voicing his sympathies as to what had occurred just moments ago. He ascends a ladder to the top battlements of the gate, and then turns to the crowd as Mr. Peter's silence begins to address those gathered. Then we return to Rowan and Arel sometime before the massacre on the bridge, as they attempt to make their escape from the plague-ridden maniacs that have begun to pour out onto the surface from the aqueducts beneath the rings. They duck and dip through whatever paths present quickest, as Rowan cries out warnings of the infected presence on the streets. Suddenly, Arel trips up as the pursuing masses reach out to him. Rowan miraculously manages to grab Arel and wrest him from their grasp before they are able to seal his fate. Arel rescued, he and Rowan continue ducking through alleys and main streets until they happen upon a jailhouse. Arel deftly scales the side of the building to the roof as he tells Rowan to head inside whilst he maintains overwatch, Arel pointing to the door of the building as the sheriff inside beckons Rowan to hurry in. Rowan enters and the sheriff barricades the door shut as the cursed infected crash against it. They claw and moan before eventually they back off from the directed assault. Rowan thanks and speaks with the jailer, Daniel, who informs them that the last of the formal evacuations have all been completed, these groups consisting of the Quarter Crown in Order of Heroes. Some time passes, and during this, Rowan observes the infected acting once again in a highly intelligent manner. One of them approaches the door to a domicile and composes itself enough to knock on the door. Unfortunately, a resident within heeds the knock and opens the door enough for the awaiting infected to rush in, assumedly sealing the fates of those within the residence. Eventually, they enact a plan to get Arel inside through the doorway, considering that the windows will not accommodate his size as a potential entry point. The plan is that Rowan will open the door, and as soon as it is opened, he will throw a distraction down the alley so that Arel might descend more safely. But fortunately for them, a not-so-fortunate soul presents and distracts the infected, saving Rowan the effort as Arel descends from the roof, slaying one of the infected before he proceeds into the jailhouse door as it is shut behind him. Both inside now, they eventually follow Daniel's direction to a secret passage that is hidden by a wall in one of the cells, the proposed exit for them to escape the rings and regroup with their friends. Upon entering the cell, though, Daniel's true alliances present as he locks them inside. A night of silence are the only words that are needed from him for the realization to irrefutably set within Rowan and Arel's minds. They decide to take the opportunity to rest, considering there certainly isn't a hidden passage to this cell, as was deceptively purported. After their rest, and after Arel easily unlocks the cell door, he proposes to Rowan that they teach Daniel a lesson. Slowly they creep their way towards an unsuspecting Daniel, who is viewing out a window to what is transpiring outside. And before he can react to Rowan sneaking up, Rowan pounces and is able to close the gap and grapple Daniel, restraining him. Dagger pressed to his throat now, Arel and Rowan interrogate Daniel to see what information they can garner, before Arel slides in the knife, ending him. Considering Arel and Rowan discover that there was never a tunnel to escape from the jailhouse, they elect to take the high ground and escape via the ramparts surrounding the rings. Their trek would need to be made quickly, as it certainly would not be long before the infected take notice of them. Unfortunately, the route turns out to be more difficult than anticipated, even for Arel, who once again is just barely saved by the quick actions of Rowan. They find themselves eventually in a very bleak situation as both fail to make it up to the parapets and wind up on the streets below. But thankfully, Aurel has a trump card in his grappling hook, and with it he and Rowan are able to scale the rampart walls to the parapets and are now free to make their way out of the now fully infested rings. They return to the Sleeping Moon Tavern, where they discover the recent additions of the captured Neramine, before Rowan sets out to finally rejoin with the party. It's now that we return to the portcullis on the bridge, Rowan coming up to Briar and Dominicus as they stand before Mr. Silence while he addresses those gathered at the bridge gate. It's as Mr. Silence begins to descend the ladder that Rowan retorts he is no king, unlike his claims to be just moments ago. Briar and Dom now become privy to the insane idealizations of Peter Silence, as Rowan confirms Silence to be one of, if not the sole conspirator, in what has befallen the city. Dominicus approaches close to Mr. Silence, questioning the logic of his motives, and expectorates into his face at the disgust of what he has caused, and in hopes of dooming him to an ironic fate as well. Peter appears unconcerned, though, and anchored that nothing can change the course of fate that has been set in motion. Time being of the essence, members of their party still at grave risk, Dominicus himself being one of them, the three elect to leave Mr. Silence at the gate and return to Amansar's shop. Upon returning, it is observed that Karun is looking a bit worse for wear than Dominicus visually, as Amansar continues about his compounding, with Asher observing. Rowan informs the party whole about what he and Aurel had learned, including the true fate of Amansar's daughter, and Asher elaborates as to the progress of the cure. Amansar being presented with the known facts, he seems to soften a bit more, and relents that he is undertaking a very difficult compounding process, and he describes the base concept of how the potion must work. Considering the developing conditions of Dominicus and Karun, and how short time frames seem to be for one who is infected to turn, the group unanimously decides to bind the two of them, restraining them so that if the worst symptoms were to present, then hopefully they'll be contained well enough that they might still be able to treat them. The next day, Karun and Dom look decidedly worse than last night, and Briar approaches Amansar after heartfully reassuring Karun. She inquires about his consumption of a vial, to which he responds that it was the cure, before downing a potion of invisibility in attempts to escape. Fortunately, Karun is lucid enough to detect magic and see him exiting the building. Briar raises alarm for Asher to pursue, but he is already giving chase, and they are fortunately able to stop the fleeing Amansar. They bring him back and toss him to the side. Meanwhile, the rest of the party have discovered a formula. Karun deciphers it, and they are able to confirm with the Amansar, after the group manages to draw some semblance of honest empathy from their new captive, that this concoction should work, provided the appropriate brew time is committed to the solution. Rowan chances to release him from his bindings, on that he assists in preparing the solutions for brewing. This necessary time, however, might not be something that can be afforded, for as they set to their work, Karun and Dominicus begin to move in an agitated fashion, and from Dom, a bramble of flowers and vines sprout up, emanating from his person, as he and Karun start to flex against their bindings. Inside the mind of Dominicus, as Asher tries desperately to keep him grounded in the real world, Dom can see only his mother, Lady Alelia, as a wolf ravages her form, before transforming into a mocking Asher Flatfang. Dominicus's rage surges, and it is from here we shall continue the story of the Legends of Aelos.